Similar to previous themes, but with a slightly different slant, is this 14th chapter of Erickson, which covers the topic of providence. Again, getting close to this idea of how does God actually actively guide our lives? How does he go about this? Well, what is providence? On page 138, here's his definition. Providence is the continuing action of God, by which he preserves in existence the creation which he has brought into being and guides it to his intended purposes for it. That's not a bad definition. Certainly could live with that. The idea is we're not alone in this world. There's an overall arching purpose and plan that is working. Remember, if we assume it's there, it's there. We walk by faith and not by sight. If we do not assume it's there, then in the words of theologian Doiveerd, the Reformed theologian, everything is just chaos and old night. But if we assume God is there, we can see his plan, we can see his care, even in the critical times in our lives. So providence could be defined as preservation. Erickson's quote, God's children cannot be separated from his love and keeping. Though not spared from trial or danger, they are preserved within it. And then providence is government. God is sovereign even in what are thought of as the accidental occurrences of life, so that even the sinful actions of humans are part of God's providential working. It's a well-known theme in the early fathers that God even uses the devil for his own purposes. God will have his plan even if those who stand against him help bring it about. But we need to be careful as to what we identify as God's providence. Now, this is where it begins to get tricky. Did God providentially decide this airliner should crash and so many people should die? Did God providentially decide a certain nation would exist in grim poverty while another nation flourishes? So how do we really identify what God's providence is? And then providence in prayer. Scripture teaches that God's plan is fixed, but also that prayer has value. Now, Erickson's way of getting these two together is to simply conclude that prayer is the means by which God accomplishes his purposes. And that would be a good way of saying it, that God uses our prayer to bring about his ultimate will. And we do not always receive what we ask for. Sometimes God says no, and we need to recognize that. And sometimes God decides to close the doors. But we must trust in a higher power, do our best and pray, and God will show us the way. But is there a middle way? Now, this is this theme I mentioned previously about middle knowledge. You could divide God's knowledge up into three aspects. Natural knowledge, or I would also call it necessary knowledge, those things which God knows by his very nature. That is, all metaphysically necessary truths. All the laws of physics, the dynamics, the laws of this world. Those are just things that God has created. They're just there. Then there's God's free knowledge. Truths created by God's creative act of willing. Things that God just created. He didn't have to create, like the world, like you, like me. That would be part of God's free knowledge. I would probably call that ordained knowledge, just the idea of God's plan and purpose in creating this world for his own reasons. But you could also use the terminology of free knowledge. Then there's this aspect of middle knowledge. Knowledge of what choices might be made by free creatures in all real or hypothetical circumstances. Middle knowledge is just the idea that there is a part of our lives God does not knowingly arrange or interfere with, and we are free to go our way, but that in his ordained plan all things will work together for his good. Now, providence and miracles. There are three views of how miracles relate to natural laws. We often wonder, well, what is a miracle? Now, I will give you a source that you can read that I think would come the closest to explaining miracles of any theologian I'm aware of. And that would be the Summa Theologiae, the highest theology of St. Thomas Aquinas. Quite a long 60-some volumes of Latin translated. I think it's translated into English. But the great St. Thomas Aquinas, if you want to have somebody discuss miracles, I think he would be the foremost authority. But again, that's a long step to take. But the point is, we really don't understand miracles, but we can say some things about them. They are themselves manifestations of little-known natural laws. Now, that would be one view of miracles. Another view is that miracles break the laws of nature. They just, boom, do it different. A third view, natural forces are countered by supernatural force. And I've said this seems preferable, so that God takes what is there and through His Spirit elevates it and exercises it to the ultimate, and a miraculous event occurs. I have no way of explaining all of that. And it is true that there are some miracles we don't know a lot or that do not seem to occur. God does not necessarily attach a head when it's cut off, or God does not interfere in some way that interrupts a final decisive event. And yet, people are cured of cancer, people are cured of tumors, people are cured of blindness, and delivered by miraculous power. So I really don't know how to explain those. We can simply affirm that God answers prayer, and of course the greatest miracle of all will be our resurrection. So what is the purpose of miracles then? Well, miracles basically have three purposes: to glorify God, to establish the truth of the revelation accompanying them, and to meet human needs. So miracles do have a purpose, and prayer does have a purpose. Many of us have seen miracles. Others of us have seen very few, if any, miracles. But God is still there. He's still working. And I think perhaps one of the greatest miracles is how He ordains our life and brings about certain things to bring us where we are when we had no way of arranging them. I think God is present miraculously in ways we don't always associate with being miracles. Just the fact you're there now, I'm talking to you now. God is present. God is working His will. And I think perhaps the greatest miracle is the will of God in protecting and loving His children, leading us all to our final destination.